Well, the only.
We're presenting another rate increase as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mic. People short.
Okay. Very busy 2 weeks.
The only comments are.
That neighborhood and make the rate resolution presentation.
Either come up on the west side of the restaurant.
Yeah.
Or
On the 23rd, but you're gonna have them down.
right around.
2.5. That's what you're gonna do. 2.5. We were in Mexico 8 weeks ago. We're gonna go back to Florida spring break. We're gonna do an adult week and be back by Easter weekend, sometime Saturday. Probably.
You're not moving or anything, right?
Yeah.
No. Heard you talking about Toronto girl, that's.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm still joining the Zoom, but we'll go ahead and call the order for March 9th, Thursday, 2023, the Utility Policy Committee. Like to set the agenda. Are there any changes or additions? Peter.
For the Stantec component, if we
Yes.
could move that up, because we're gonna be waiting,
Okay,
could we move that up to after public comment or something?
sure.
Um,
Is there any,
I think that they should hear the discussion of the utility. The equity benefit fee. Because we're gonna be asking them to chime in on that, so. In terms of. Affordability? Nope. Which one? The water connections, extensions. Oh.
So should we move that up as well? Or if you want to have them wait, they can.
Well, where are they? I'd like them to be here for that discussion. That's all I'm saying. So wherever you want to move them so they can hear that.
do you want that before their discussion?
Just as long as they don't go away before we have that discussion.
Do you want to do that one first? And then
Sure,
expand?
sure.
Okay,
I'm just thinking rather than them waiting through the meeting.
okay. The motion to accept the agenda with those two. By Jim, support by Tom to accept the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Introduction from guests.
Good morning, Jim Behrman from Stantec.
Good morning, Rich Pearson. I'm listening in today, but there's some reverberation and some feedback on the microphone. I don't know if somebody has their mic on or something. Maybe that can be helped, but otherwise I'll suffer through it. Thanks.
Asking everybody to make sure their speakers are on their computers. Yeah. Okay. I think everyone else been here before, so we'll continue with the acceptance of the January 12th, 2023 draft minutes.
I only saw one correction. Mr. Hefner was present. It was not via Zoom at the January meeting. So I think that needs to be written in. So via Zoom portion.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess if we're listing alternates, Steve Ascenzi is the city's alternate. So just a minor thing.
So,
He's listed under others present, so under the category of alternates present.
Yeah, he should get moved up.
yes, okay,
Yes.
thank you. Is there a motion to accept the minutes as corrected?
I can make that motion.
Or
Motion by John, supported by Jeff to accept the minutes with those two corrections. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public comments. Anyone present wishing to address? We will continue then with the amended agenda item, water connections, extensions, and fees. Tom, I believe
Okay.
you are.
Yep. So I'll share my screen. Oh. So, this discussion is ongoing. I just wanted to have a chance to, and you asked me 2 meetings ago to present this to the UPC, because we'll need to make some decisions on this. But it started at one of our initial meetings when, with the new system, with the new contract, envisioning equal rates in one system. The townships were struggling with the fact that they are still charging fees for connections, for capital improvements, and they're all charging different fees. And I think it was Libby that said, let's have a look at that so that we can be consistent. And it was really at that time from a township perspective. So my presentation is sort of geared from that thought process, but then we'll move into what we're talking about eventually with the equity benefit fee, and we'll explain what that means in a minute, will be system-wide. Because people who are connecting are buying into a system that somebody else built for them to have the capacity so that they can connect. So just, we'll go through some definitions that will be helpful through the presentation. Number one is installation fee. I want to make sure that that is different than a connection fee. Installation fee is the actual physical cost it takes to connect from the public water main in the street to the house. And right now, that's currently $6,000. So that's for city crews to go out and dig up the pipe, connect to the pipe, take it into the house, set a meter. $6,000 for an inch and a quarter. And it's based on actual average cost. Obviously, some will be more expensive, some are less. If you're on the short side of the street, it'll be less. On the long side of the street, it'll be more. It's what we used to call cost averaging, but it's just sort of, rather than every single residential connection, you have different costs at $6,000. Above an inch and a quarter, so 2 inch and above, because the construction costs get more, even up to like an 8-inch line for a big industrial user. Those are based on actual costs. So the city will put together an estimate for all the parts and pieces and the amount of time it will take, and then pay that actual cost. So from 6,000, it could go up to the 8-inch line. It could be 20, 25,000.
Over 100.
Yeah. Depends on the, so that's the actual cost connecting to the system. Yeah.
So does that include sprinklers too? If you come out with a single main and you split, or you don't have 2 taps, right?
Yeah, so for the most part, in the large commercial developments, we come into the building with an 8-inch certifier. Once we're inside the building, then we'll split off from the fire service level, the residential after that. But coming into the building,
That's pretty large. Well, so anything up to that we mean
Each according to your smallest pipe.
Those are the smallest size service that we install.
Yeah.
We do not sell them.
Now the meters are
I got
5/8,
I
right?
got a half inch to my house.
1 inch.
1 inch, okay. Well, a lot of the existing are 5/8, right?
So there was some older.
Yeah, so some of the older homes with a smaller pipe and the smaller meters, also the kind, if you're sprinkling the yard, it's hard to take a shower. So with the bigger pipes and the bigger meters, you get better flow. The connection benefit front foot fee, this is really sort of township centric, for people to connect. It was a charge to the, I'll just read it. Amount historically charged by the out city local units for the privilege or benefit of connecting to the water system, usually based on the average annual cost of installing water main in a typical plat, the lots on both sides of the street. So what the idea there is that the townships were participating in the extension of the capital of the pipe in the street. How much would it cost for people to connect to that to pay back that investment? So they pay, they build a pipe down the street for $1 million. They have to get that investment back through time. So the front foot fee or the benefit fee per parcel, every township does it different. Some have multiples parcels in front foot, some are just front foot. And
The components are intended to make it fair.
yeah,
I mean, it isn't.
fair between large frontage lots versus small frontage lots. Because if it's all front foot and you got a 200-foot lot, you're gonna pay a lot. If it's all parcel fee, you got 200-foot lot versus 100-foot lots, you're getting a good deal. So that's why they would blend that. So that was intended to recoup the capital costs that the townships would have paid to, or recoup the investment in the system. Third part is the amount charged by outside local units added to the quarterly usual bill. And it's the flat rate percentage on the total bill collected by the city and then sent to the local unit, I think every quarter. And those have been running like 1 to 3%. I didn't look at that, but it's not a lot. An assessment, it's a special assessment district in this context. That if a neighborhood were to come in and say, we want water, the township can do a special assessment district and do the project, $100,000 and you got 10 people in the neighborhood, it's $10,000 per home. So it's sort of the same idea as the connection benefit fund, but they're paying for what the cost of the capital improvement is. And it could go all over the board. If it's a normal typical plat, it should be close to the benefit parcel fee. If they're 2-acre lots, it would be much more, right? Because you're getting a lot less contributors for the same amount of, or actually more infrastructure. So, yes, any questions anytime? The ready to serve fee is in the rate part of it.
Yeah, that's already in the rate structure. And that's based on your meter size.
Yeah.
And that's intended to be a reflection of the current capital costs of the system, separate from the final cost of the system.
Yeah, so that's
For their
so So the ready to serve is sort of on the commodity side, as you're buying water, you pay for that. So historically, the townships have charged these fees and for different reasons to mitigate the risk that they have to pay for some water out of their general fund. They have their own funds to pay for internal water administration, utility cost, legal cost, engineering cost as their system expands, or they have to deal with developers that want water in their new developments. And in the past, to contribute to continue to build out their respective distribution systems, actually putting pipe in the ground, and then have sufficient reserves to repair, replace those, big capital repair, and replace those pipes someday in the future. But with the new water contract, 3 of those 4 reasons to have connection fees have gone away. The system is building the pipe either through capital improvement. Developers will continue to build pipe as part of their development. If there's a special project to build pipe that isn't in the capital improvement program, say an unusual development or running it a mile down the street to get to some unusual industrial development, that then comes back to the UBC, and then we will figure out what connection charges need to be done for those special cases. But it really, for the township day-to-day connection fees, it eliminates 1, 3, and 4 of that. The only thing that at this point they really need to have money to pay for is going to be the administrative cost, because that'll still be there. They still will have developers come in to the planning department. They'll still have staff time for the planners to talk about it. They'll have time for the engineers and maybe some legal costs. So there still will be some costs, but it'll be significantly less than what they anticipated. And then so we have a 40-year agreement that takes away those risks. And then the agreement, the way it's structured, 40-year with renewal renewed in 20-year increments, and automatically renewed in 5-year increments unless terminated by the policy, by the parties. So given that we think that we have a good agreement here with this kind of continuance, this gives a level of comfort that there's stability in the system, and there'll be stability in the system beyond the 40-year period. Nothing in the water agreement prevents the township from continuing practicing the charging these connection fees. However, 3 points here: the implementation of such fees and accumulation and use of water reserve funds requires legal justification, as the rates and charges in the state must be based on actual costs. Since there are now no actual costs, or the actual costs have been diminished by 95%, we anticipate that these charges will go away at the township. So if somebody connects, townships are not going to be charging the front foot or parcel fees, because there's no reason for them to collect that money, again, because it is now the system. The system will be handling those capital improvements. Yeah, and then the last is that any connection fees charged or collection should, to the extent possible, be consistently applied throughout the water system. Because again, and this is where we started shifting away from just the township into looking at the system, so the township and city. So the getting rid of this connections for the capital, and then how are we look at it as system-wide? So not just the townships, but the townships and cities system-wide. And this is where we came up with the idea of this possible equity benefit fee. So I'll just read through this. Should each new property, as the owner of said property initiates a connection to the water system, pay an equity benefit fee into the system for the privilege or benefit of connecting to a water system that was constructed by the team before. A system that has sufficient capacity to accommodate the new usage, the new property, the new customer. So when the city has built out the system, even though sometimes in the past the township paid for it, the city built it with the capacity in mind to service the areas beyond the immediate areas. So whenever we do an extension to the system, they're not looking at just that neighborhood, but they're looking at not the next neighborhood and beyond. And they're making decisions on, treatment facilities and just transmission facilities, pumps, water towers. So there's money being spent by the system to create a system that can be expanded, that can add additional users. So if we get rid of all of the fees at the township to connect to the system, that would imply that the next person who would be able to connect to the system connect for free. So they're a free rider. So they're connecting to a system that others have paid to make big enough so that they have the privilege to be able to connect to that. So it's just recognizing there's value there and that they should share in the investments, the past investments that have been made really on their behalf, because they live within that service area. So how do you put a number on that? This is when we get to the end, this is where we're going to ask Stantec for some advice. So the existing system, $100 million book value, and each customer today is paid the quarterly charges, rates, investment benefits, everything that you paid in the past to continue to build out the system. Again, a system with the capacity to allow for the expansion to others and to allow connection to those who have pipe in front of them but not yet connected. So we had, in working through this discussion, we had been working with the regional commission, again, because it was sort of starting from a township perspective. And we had brought Mark Beauchamp from Utility Financial Solutions into the discussion. Is it possible for a rate consultant to calculate what this should be? Representing the amount that has been contributed by each user for the existing system and the extra capacity of the existing system. So the rate consultant is able to calculate the underlying equity each connected customer has contributed to date. Those contributions to the wells, towers, transmissions, everything that it takes to make it possible for the next person to connect. So here, it's impossible to see this. And I don't know that it's really even that important to see what this is, but if you have these, and I'm not the financial guy, Peter, probably you're closer, which is good. But you're taking basically the net book value, and then I don't know, Peter, can you give me a 30-second explanation of what this is saying?
So it's basically taking the net book value and then I believe he factors out like the connection component, but just considers the transmission and distribution component, net book value, and then divides that by the equivalent connections across the system. So if there's, if it says 50 to 8,000, it's basically saying the net book value without connections and the related debt for connections, divided by the number of customers, they should all get a payback from the participant who wants to connect for their investment in the system today. And so the number that it calculates, I believe it's like $1,500.
Yeah, about that. Yep.
That people who live with a connection to the system currently have ownership theoretically of the system that is used to service them, not necessarily the line from the pipe to their house. On $1,500, they'd like that back from the next participant.
Yep. And then, so that would be for the smaller meters. And again, we need to probably have Stantec look at this with James's input in terms of, because we have 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters here. But there would be then the connection, the equity benefit fee would then slide and scale for the larger meters. Because again, the smaller, the single family home, $1,500 for connection. But then you run an 8-inch meter to industrial, that's gonna be the equivalent of, 200 residences. So they should pay commensurate with the capacity that they're using, because they're using up the capacity of the system.
$44,000.
What's that?
Per this calculation, $44,000.
Yeah, which in the world of 8-inch users, $44,000 is probably low. So again, this wasn't an exhaustive analysis by Mark. It was here's sort of what the ballpark would be. And so I wanted to well, I'll get to it. So again, so the equivalent, the equity benefit fee about $1,500 per meter equivalent. We sort of already talked about this. So I'm going to sidebar here for a second. So where in our discussion we started talking about this was, getting rid of the township fees because they don't need them anymore because the system is going to pay for the system, or the facility policy committee will come up with rates and charges for the special cases. But the capital improvement plan includes pipe up 33rd Street, and Texas Drive. Yeah, there's a lot of money.
We're doing that right now.
Yeah. So there's a lot of capital improvement plans that are being put in the ground. They're putting pipe down the road that are being paid for by the users. And without the townships charging the fee, that the person then is getting the free ride. They're getting connection for free, paid for by all the existing users. So again, we were thinking that the new person connecting needs to have some skin in the game. They need to pay for something as into the system, which would then in turn lower rates, because there's now another revenue source from those people buying into the system that if they weren't buying into the system, the ratepayers would have to pay.
Tom, I believe there's a good example. We sat at the table about 4 months ago and talked about an extension for water main for an apartment complex or for housing.
Yep.
How's that going to work? How does that? So we sat here and approved that the city would invest funds into upsizing the pipe for future expansion. We get return on that decision then that this group supported, correct? Because then
Yes. So
we
then,
get connection fees on that,
yeah, and
equity benefit fees, if you will.
so in that case, and I think, anyway, in a case like that, that extension is made by the city. The developer pays for the oversight. I'm sorry, the developer paid for all the pipe. The city paid for the oversight. And then the developer then would have to pay for the benefit fee or the meter charges.
Yep.
So probably, I don't know how they're connecting there's, 8. You know how they're doing that down there? It's eight big buildings and maybe a 4-inch meter per building. So boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, I don't know the details of how it's coming in.
So again, based on Mark's very preliminary, so over the past 4 years, this would have generated $750,000 annually. And for 2022, so about $750,000 annually is what this would have brought in. But, and just for comparison, if you bring in $1 million annually to offset the rate increases, it would have made about a 4% difference in the increase in rate. So had this been in place when we did this last rate increase, maybe it would have been 4% less. Now, again, the rates issue is so dynamic. I'm gonna leave it there. Again, this is ballpark figures. And again, something that we want Stantec to have a look at and advise us on. So with a new equity benefit fee, it would be charged to all for all new pipe installed that is available to be connected to the way they would implement the equity benefit fee for existing pipe. So for all, yeah, this has to do with our contract. For all new pipe, it's very clear that you can charge this equity benefit fee in the contract. For existing pipe, the water agreement did not directly contemplate to include this methodology for a system-wide fee. There may need to be an amendment to the agreement to allow this. And again, this in the last slide is to give this to the owners, but have them tell us if that's true or not. And such a fee would likely be charged and collected by the city as you are administering the system, and people have to come to you to pay $6,000, and they got to do the computer anyway. So it would be administered by the city. Water agreement question: can the water agreement be interpreted to provide UPC the ability to implement this for all new piping? It's sort of a restatement of what I just said. For all new pipe, for new developer pipe to contribute it, and existing pipe that is available to be connected to. And I think the slide before was that the existing pipe question, I would see that, and we should ask these questions if we're looking at opening up the contract to have an amendment. But the way I see it is, there's three big buckets: capital improvement plan. So the city has a capital improvement plan, they just build it and then apply it to the rates. Developer driven, I don't see that it's going to change. The developer's still going to develop. They've been paying a benefit fee for the use of the water. That's not going to change much for them. Again, they're still, even though they're building the pipe and the development, still relying on the system and the capacity the system can provide them. The only thing that I see that would be different is special situations, like I said, big industrial use where you got to run pipe a mile down the road, or if there's a developer that needs to extend down the road, those kind of things can come to us to discuss and look at different types of rates and charges that the contract allows us to do. So in our discussion of this, we have brought this in front of the regional commission. Regional commission is in favor of this. They support it. In conversations with James, and I know you've had conversations with administration, the city's in support of this concept. Again, at this point, it's a system-wide concept. So I think that in terms of the people who support us as a body are in support of this. But we as a body are the ones to make that decision. So, and then lastly, I'll open it for discussion. But two things that I've mentioned a couple times already is if we're gonna move forward with this, we should ask and effect their opinion on fees and effects on rates. And then discuss contract amendment if necessary. I think there is differences of opinions already between, but that's, we need to keep that too. The lawyers themselves think that they need to do that to help support this concept. So that's all I had. I don't know that we need to make a decision today, and we just wanted to lay it out. I can send this PowerPoint to everybody so they can flip through it. Or I can send it to James and put it on our website or portal or whatever you call it. Or at this point, maybe we need, as a board, I think we want to have, not necessarily make this, have a decision, but at least have a consensus to send Stantec off and do some work and to have the lawyers go off and talk. I mean, if it's a non-starter at the stable, we probably want to have them do that. But, so just open up the discussion.
Couple of comments for you that is based on my understanding of the contract is, can you go back one slide? I'll go back one more, please. So we currently could put a charge when there's a new pipe installed. That contract clearly says that. And then in a new developer contributed pipe that's installed, I don't think we could in that case. And the existing pipe, we couldn't from this board's perspective. So I believe the contract says when there's a cost to the system, the UPC would determine what the charge would be to those connected. But when there isn't a new charge, it wouldn't be under the auspices of the UPC. And that would be the reason for amending the contract so that perhaps a charge could be consistently applied across all of these categories. Also within the contract, theoretically, if there's a new pipe installed and it's a long one and the UPC doesn't like the people who connect or are going to connect, we could say their charge is X. And then if there's a pipe connected and it's not very costly, the UPC, the connection would be Y, which would become very, very cumbersome for administration to say, well, you're in this subdivision, you're in this subdivision, you're in this partner. And so I think some of the benefit of the concept of a across the board charge is that the ease of administration is important because we don't want to tie up staff time trying to track, who connects in 30 years to a pipe somewhere. And at that point in time, the UPC said X. So this, I think, would maybe ease some of the administration theoretically. We haven't actually assessed the fee at this point, so there really isn't that issue. But in the case of the I2 and the 3I there, I don't believe the UPC has any authority to assess currently under the contract to set a fee. And I would also just point out one other thing, personally, or my understanding of like the rate calculation is I would suggest that we come up with the calculation of this fee would be based on a formula, and there's a basis for one developed there by the utility or the consulting firm, that we would set it, let's say, every 5 years, every 10 years, because, or as we deem necessary, perhaps, because the contract provides for years when we don't need to use a rate consultant. And we could just go with the rate that is coming down the pipe, or we expect, or we could say increase 3%. And by locking yourself into it's calculated like this, you're going to get a charge that's $1,521, and seems to me like $1,500 would be sufficient, for a 5-year period or whatever. So something else to consider, that should we proceed, we would want to give some guidance to the legal counsel that would be charged with preparing that amendment to the contract that we actually would have no authority over approving. It would have to be then the city and then the participants and things. So just thoughts for you.
Good thoughts, yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of having a formula, so it's not just this body saying, here's the number.
Yeah, I think a formula would be good that we approve periodically or something, just to get away from having to calculate it. You know, because we could go, you know, let's say things are rolling along good and we want to save $100 grand this year. Let's go with the rate that was calculated already, and we'll update that in 2 years and maybe save money. Just
Or maybe it's tied to any rate changes. Because if you're doing a rate change, you are engaging with a rate consultant. And that could be part of.
well, not necessarily, because they're projecting out right now 7, 7, 7, 7. Could you just say 7 worked for this year? Let's go with 7 again, you know?
I mean, this concept seems really good. It seems equitable across the system, you know, I think that just now it's just details. I mean, one is are these the right numbers?
Yeah.
So is that part of it? Like looking at working with Stantec of, is it 1,500? Maybe, oh, we missed something. Maybe it should be 1,800. I don't know, or other direction.
And
we
perhaps identifying that formula for what it should be.
Right. And then just thinking out loud, that it does seem like there's some logic that this gets either set or left alone annually. At the same time, we look at rates. You know, there might, you know, I'm sure all townships do the same thing. You've got fees for all kinds of different things. And we do too at the city. So sometimes we leave them alone, sometimes we raise them. It kind of depends on what's going on that budget year and what's going on inflation wise and things like that. I mean, the answer, like, can we do it with the existing contract or not? I think we have to just dig into that a little bit. Based on the PowerPoint here. And, you know, again, I think the concept seems sound from my standpoint.
Would we want to ask Stantec to review the calculation as provided?
I would think so.
And
But I
perhaps establish a basic definition of an approach to doing that. You know, maybe they'll look at it and say, there's a different way to do this. This does not make sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to basically maybe ask, and if they can do it, I would suspect they could, but if they could put together a definition of a methodology to calculate this, which the attorneys are going to want to have to say this is how you calculate.
Do we want to ask Stantec if there's any initial reaction
Sure,
to this?
sure.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jim Behrman from Stantec. Yeah, we across the country do this type of work, I'm sure, just like Mark does with UFS. Conceptually, the charge, whatever you term it, I mean, it can be called an equity benefit fee, it can be called a system development charge, it can be called an impact fee. We've seen all of the different definitional, or I should say, titles for these types of charges. Basically, the concept is growth pays for growth, so that your existing ratepayers are not paying to attach new customers to the system. And certainly we can take a look at it. There's typically 3 different methods that are used to do this. It depends, you know, like your system has available capacity that will kind of narrow us down, and certainly look at the work that Mark and his crew have done. I will say that you don't have to worry about a formula. I mean, it'll actually be a study similar to what Mark has done that will become, I mean, it needs to be defensible. changes to these types of charges can be lightning rods for major developers in your area that operate in different communities, and they'll contrast and compare. So, we envisioned in responding to the RFP for the consulting services that this would be one piece of the work that we would look at. So, I noticed Mark used 2020 information, which is most likely fine, but we would probably want to use 21 or 22 information if available, and go from the most recent data to look at it. So, but it is a charge, and Mark's right that in the financial models that we build, and I'm sure that UFS builds for their work, we always factor in the concept of an equity benefit fee, which serves to cover typically capital and associated O&M costs to hook up a new customer. Okay. One of the questions we will ask eventually as we finalize the rate model is, are those dollars restricted? Meaning the dollars collected from new customers coming into the system, are they restricted only for capital costs and such related to new customers hooking up, or can they be applied to offset capital costs throughout the system? So, the charge that you're looking at is very common in the industry. I will say that it is developed in up to 3 ways, and it kind of depends on the circumstances of each community. But yes, I would agree that, it has to be defensible in the event that whatever the number changes to, whether it's 1521 or whether it's 1821, et cetera, as you implement the change, new customers and developers will likely question at some point the derivation of the charge. I would suggest that you don't necessarily need to do it every year. You might want to look in a 3 to 5 year range. You could do it as part of the rate consultant's tenure. Okay. We have basically, you have us for a couple of years, right, on the water side. And Peter's right. The financial model we'll share with you here momentarily actually projects system costs out an immediate 5 years, but also 10 years based on the data that we have from the city, and then our process of creating a financial forecast. So that'll kind of be up to you how often you want to look at the number, but I would suggest you don't necessarily need to look at it every year unless you choose to. So I guess that at this point is all I have to say. It would be helpful for us if we could get a copy of the slides that Tom went through, whether it's out on your website eventually. That'll help us. And then we'll get busy on this piece of work. So we'll probably, James, have some follow-up questions for you. We'll need a fixed asset registry and so forth to really get into the plant detail, which is typically how the charges are developed, similar to what Mark did.
Now, we should put some type of, to have you proceed, we should put some kind of scope as the UPC on what we want them to do. Do we want them to, one thought I have is, if there's 3 methods, could you just write down what are the 3 methods and provide those to us before any calculation is made? That's one approach. And we could say, here's 3 approaches.
and some judgment on which might
Yeah, I
be
mean,
pertinent to the
Right.
community.
so there's no previous, requirement to follow what we've been doing in the past, but could you give us like a description of the three approaches, and then we could say, and maybe a paragraph that says why each one is used differently across the
Yes.
country, and stop there, and we can say, this one seems to make sense, or just a thought, rather than you just start calculating things.
Sure, we can do that.
That's what and let the board decide what they're gonna do, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, yeah, we can do that and give you kind of our, knowing that the system has extra capacity. And maybe it's okay with UPC, we'll give you the three typical methodologies employed for these types of charges, and then kind of give you our thoughts or recommendations. I'm guessing it's, without seeing any numbers, I'm guessing it's likely to align with Mark's use of the equity method. But, depending on the circumstances of each community as they develop these charges, does replacement cost new make sense? Does original cost make sense? Or does some hybrid of the two make sense? And essentially those are the three methodologies, but certainly we can provide you more detail on each methodology for your consideration, and then we can have follow-up discussions. And that's fine, Peter, on our end, before we, actually start digging deep into the details to do calculations.
Yeah, and I'm thinking if we could keep it simple, that would be, but we'll see what you come back with.
Yeah, I will say, whatever you decide to do and whatever change you decide to make, it has to be defensible in our minds. And I'm not saying the work that Mark has done for the townships, could easily pass. I think it could easily pass the sanity check, and defensibility if somebody were to take ultimately, go towards litigation on this.
So, Libby, how should we approach this? Should we have a motion to have Stantec proceed with?
This research form and then bring it back to us.
Yes. How do you want to word that? Or Wendy?
I'll move that we ask Stantec to list and summarize the different methods that we could calculate the equity benefit fee, along with, discussion of each one and recommendations on what way they think would be best for this system. It's being recorded. And then bring that back to us at the next meeting. Is that too quick?
Yeah, I don't think it's too quick. Can you folks do that in the next month, Jim?
Yes.
And then also just something for us to consider for next time too is, once this gets put into the contract, we won't want to be changing it. Not that that's a big deal to put it in there and it's good, but it's not something we'll probably change in 40 years.
I understand what Jim said, though. I think the key piece to that is the defendability or the sanity, does it pass the sanity test? So I think once that piece of the puzzle is determined, that will make it fit in contract.
I agree.
Yeah.
That was our item motion on the table.
I'll support it then, so we can have discussion.
So, okay,
I'm just gonna, not in this motion, but then are we gonna get this back and then say, well, what's it gonna require of us in the contract and all the other things that come up? Do we want some of that information at the same time? So we're not saying, okay, now we think this is a good method, but what about this and this and this? Let's come back to the next meeting and get answers to those questions.
What I had anticipated is we would send the rate consultants and the lawyers off to figure out and maybe there needs to be some discussion. Maybe the lawyers need to understand what Stantec is going to tell us, but I intend to have Stantec go off and do what they're going to do, what the motion on the table is. And then have, really be the regional commission lawyer and city attorney discuss what, based on the concept, at least start discussions on what they need to know or what they need to, do we need an amendment? And if we do need an amendment, what it needs to say. They can start those discussions. I don't think we need to wait for Stantec. I mean, it's still, what we're talking about here is the concept of this thing. The lawyers can go away with it. What Stantec is doing now is, here's the concept, but here's 3 different ways you can zero in on the actual number.
And then also Stantec could provide that to the attorneys, the different methodologies to weigh in on their thoughts, and maybe even weigh in on their thoughts relative to the contract.
So for staff, Larry, got the motion on the table, continue discussion on that.
Right now, we have a motion about Stantec. So we can handle that, and then we'll talk about the attorneys. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
I'll make a motion to direct
Two attorneys.
the 2 attorneys.
You direct city staff to.
Well, I mean, with this UBC, we can direct staff to do stuff. I don't know that I can direct you, regional commission, but I can ask that, I'll make a motion to direct, staff, and the city legal to reach out to the regional commission attorney to discuss possible amendments to the contract as a result of the proposed equity benefits.
I'll support that.
The motion and second for discussion. And that infers that the attorneys are going to need to work with Stantec on this.
Well, I don't know that they need to do anything with Stantec at this point until we see what the methodology is. I think the question is, does the contract have to be amended to do this?
Right.
I'm fairly confident. I've been told that it does, but that doesn't mean
By
that.
who? By another attorney?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the motion is to get the attorneys to start talking to each other. And then
Maybe they'll come to some other conclusion.
And my thinking was that the methodologies might have different effects on whether it does affect the contract. That was.
Yeah, well, I mean, from the city side, we'll have our city attorney take a look at this. Again, we're looking at the concept.
Yeah.
Is the concept consistent with the contract? I mean, that's kind of a big picture question. And whether we need a motion to that effect or not, I mean, because there's a lot of things that come out of this body that staff come out and then we have to, homework to do.
Okay.
So the motion is on the floor or no?
Yes, it's on the floor.
Do we even need a motion for this?
In my opinion, we do that.
Okay,
I mean, because we will
move forward.
sort of move forward. I mean, it's a project that staff has been working with, the consultants on. This is just the next logical stage of that, is to take it to the attorneys and take it to the other rate consultant to look at the implementation steps.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor, though. I think we need to vote on it.
Is there a drawback to having a motion?
No, I'm just saying
You would be doing it anyway.
we would be doing it anyways.
Okay. All those in favor?
I
Opposed? Motion carries.
Well, we gave Stan Tech the motion, might as well give the attorney.
Everybody gets one.
I just wanted to talk, that would be good to put some, orders on what they're doing from the motion. Theoretically. Good.
The discussion. Thank you, gentlemen.
Administration fee, is that gonna be separate from the fee in township? Engineer?
Yeah, so the surcharge, I had anticipated that would move forward because there was still be, and that's gonna be completely separate from the equity benefit fee, because the equity benefit fee is now helping pay for the capital. The surcharge would only be there to help, reimburse the townships for their costs, engaging with in development, their planning department, their engineering department, their legal department. So there's still cost and there's still stuff the townships have to do as the system expands in their jurisdiction.
And then we start from the fee.
Yep.
That surcharge would remain as it is today, probably it would likely go down just because there's no capital side of it, it's just administrative side.
Okay, the next item on the agenda then is the Stan Tech update for the 2024 water rates.
Good morning, everyone. I guess if I could ask, from the Stantec team that's working on this, they're also with me here on the call is Laura Arturo and Nish Patel. And Nish is going to share his screen if he could get access, please. And then we will take you through and I'll stress the preliminary results of the financial model. Certainly the discussion that you just had, we can certainly show you how that's factored in or can be altered in the financial model. What Nish has shared with you is what we call our summary panel from our financial analysis management system, or the acronym of FAMS. It typically is the panel that we share with the governing bodies, or those that we're asking to approve or reject our rate recommendations and other issues. But there's a number of items on here, and what we will also do here as we work through this is throw a couple scenarios at you, not necessarily from a recommended perspective, but to just show you how the impacts of some of the decisions that may be ahead of you and the city regarding certain parameters in the study can affect their results. So one of the key things that we always look at is the debt service coverage issues, line 22 and 25. If you're able to see that, Nish has highlighted it with his cursor. The current debt service coverage ratio for the seniorly debt, the city's policy is 1.4. So we have modeled that in. On line 31, the operating reserve months is how many months of annual O&M do you maintain in your operating fund balance? We again have set that consistent with the current language in the city's reserve policy that says roughly 90 days. So we've set it at 3 months. If you drop down to it's kind of starting on line 46, the operating fund graph in the upper left corner, you'll notice a black line that runs throughout the forecasting period, and that is That represents the 3 months of reserve policy that we had set in place. The next graph next to going to the right, in the middle upper, the revenue versus expense graph is typically a diagnostic tool that we utilize, in that we don't like to have significant differences between cash in and cash out as we set the financial plan. Going across the top to the right-hand corner, expenses by type, that breaks the city's water expenses down into categories like personnel services, fixed O&M, variable O&M, etc. Now I'll pop back over to the lower left. This is the CIP spending plan that's currently in the financial model, which you have seen before. And then as the model goes through, in the middle is how do you fund that? Okay. The green is the operating cash, or pay-go, if you will, is a term that I know Bart Foster has shared with you in the past. The light blue, starting from the left, is the prior bond proceeds that are being used in 2022 to fund projects. And then revenue bonds and drinking water revolving fund as sources of financing for the capital. Moving one to the right, the borrowing in the current plan is just-in-time borrowing. Obviously, there's probably some benefits which we have not finalized those yet and working with the city staff. Most likely the city would probably want to bundle 2 or 3 of those together to minimize their debt issuance costs. Okay, but that's pretty much what that represents. Lastly, in the middle on the bottom row, the CIP spending, this would be your pay-go calculation that is set to match depreciation expense according to the city's existing policies. One of the things we're still working on, to be honest with you, and it's with the city, and it may also require a kind of a follow-up call on Stantec's end to Bart Foster, is we're setting rates obviously to be in effect for 2024. What does the depreciation expense look like in 24 with the plant additions in 23, retirements of plant in 2023, expected CIP spending in 24, expected retirements of plant in 2024, contributions in aid of construction by customers or developers, etc. All will assist us in getting to a 2024 depreciation expense number, which also factors into the return component aspect of the revenue, the total revenue requirements needed per the contract. I'm just going to touch on the bottom tabs. The bottom tabs across the very, very bottom, right below Nish's cursor. Oh, actually, I'm looking at my cursor, not his, I think. What? Anyways, I lost him, Nish. I don't know. There we go. Thank you. You'll notice a number of tabs with names. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but all the data that we have received from the city and discussed with the city on a number of occasions. We actually had a discussion earlier this week with Peter, along with James Baker, and just took him through the various sources of data and how the model utilizes that data to provide the ultimate financial forecast. And you'll notice FTEs are highlighted in orange. That was something that the city asked us to look at and said, okay, if you were to add X number of FTEs or Y number of FTEs, what kind of implications would it have on the rate increase? As we stand now, there are no FTEs over, it's just basically the budgeted dollars. But Nish, if you could open, just going to share with you real quickly one of the tabs, and that would be the CIP tab that's built from the information provided to us. And you'll notice that the projects are listed, line number, amount for each fiscal year. Okay. And this would all be information that you would have seen previously as the city looks to, I'll say, buttress and rehab their system, as you're working with additional or you're working with a system that's older in that regard. So I don't want you to get lost in numbers or bogged down in the details, but you'll see that we have each of these. And then Nish, is it here on the bottom where we talk execution percentages? Because one of the assumptions we have to make is, thanks, Nish. You can see that currently in the forecast, the model reflects that only 80% of the forecasted CIP will be executed, meaning that the city, for whatever reason, just doesn't have the capacity to do 100% of the projects. So I guess without further ado, Nish, I don't know what you want to change the CIP execution to. You have a thought there?
60,
60?
because there's no,
Well, we had talked about this kind of internally as a Stantec team, and so if you watch as Nish recalibrates the model, and we've kind of, by only executing 60% of the capital, that would obviously reduce the rate pressure on the system. So with that Niche, at 60%, are we saying still that we would have to borrow more, or we would borrow less? Or maybe if you can go back to, if you would, maybe go back to the 80%, because looks like the model calibrated, and I know I didn't catch it, so I'm not sure.
The last plan should be.
Yeah. So we're saying, even Nish and Laura, with the, if we do 60% of the CIP, then what are we saying then the model would suggest we need for a rate increase?
something less than 7%.
Yeah.
Can I come in just for a minute on this, Jim?
Sure.
I wanted to point out, I met with Stan, and we did a Zoom with James and walked through the model and all the tabs. And I just wanted to throw out there a couple of things. One is, like, 7 isn't set in stone, and the numbers are not complete. So I think you still need to, like, validate some of the balances that we were looking at, and perhaps those have been updated here. But also, I think you were talking about you had to determine the allocation between customer type. That was the next phase, Jim?
Yes, yes.
So this isn't final, but the concept was, I think, for me to have some look at it. and James was there and we just kind of walked through it and why does it do this and why does it do that? But also to share with you, you know, we drive some of those based on what we do. But I didn't want you to be afraid, I guess, theoretically, looking at that top line saying, hey, that's gotta be the number at this point. Because things can be changed, and that's looking out 10 years. And also, I just wanted to throw out there, we're gonna walk through it, should time allow, some of these components that we can impact as a UPC. So I provided a handout on some of the things like targeted bond coverage or reserve amounts and things of that nature that are in the city's policy. So I just wanted to share those thoughts, you know, that when we, even if we change what the reserve percentage number of days, can you change that for us? And then we could see how does the rate or the coverage, which is necessary, the city has covenanted to cover a portion of the bond cost. What happens when you change in here? We don't want a reserve of 30 or 90 days. We want it to be 360. Can you do that, Nish?
Yes, yeah, and actually, before he jumps to that change, let me just, what he has done is, if you look at the bar graphs, the operating fund, and so forth, you'll see that by changing to a 60% CIP execution, the last plan is in green. So that would suggest to us in the scenario of only 60% CIP execution is in blue. So that would be worth a 1% drop is what we're estimating now with the preliminary numbers to only assume 60% execution of the CIP. Likewise, with less, if you drop down to the next line, the debt service coverage issues or results, you'll notice that your debt service coverage amounts go up, not surprising, because you're spending less capital each year. And then likewise, so that would be one change, okay? Peter, you mentioned, I mean, let's take the operating reserve, let's leave the CIP execution at 60%-ish, and then let's go to 12 months for an operating reserve fund target. Again, the green will be what we started the discussion with today, which is kind of our base model. And you'll notice that the graph changes significantly for the operating fund, because the blue is the scenario where you're asking for 12 months, and the green only assumes 3 months. So with that, Nish, do you have a thought, or can we do an override on the rate model? Does it still hold at 6% if we were to do that, or should it be something more? I'm guessing.
Should be higher.
Yeah, it should be higher.
Yeah.
You'll notice your debt service coverage now are reduced, because you're carrying more in the reserve fund balance. So we're gonna throw in 8s, okay? And then we'll recalibrate the model here.
Move on too far. Can I just ask a question here?
Sure.
So I ask a simple question for me to see if it's tracking what you're saying. A 20% decrease in our CIP spending only results in a 1% decrease in rates, correct?
Yep. In and of itself, that's correct.
Per year. So that's 1% less per year, which is 10 or 15% compounded in 10 years.
Over 10 years. When we talked about our increase that we just did, I guess I was roughly thinking that about half of it was due to our CIP spend. Was that accurate when we went through our whole discussion explaining our last rate increase? It was a pretty significant contributor to that was our CIP.
Right. So I think there's a lot of things moving around.
Yeah, I know. That's why before we start doing more things.
One of the things that,
Yeah, and recognize there are a number of things. This is a fresh look at it with fresh numbers from what, Bart Foster shared with you in August. I know Andy Burnham and I were involved, in those discussions and kind of the driver for the 20% increase. So I don't, please don't get vetted to any of these numbers at this point. We're dialing in with, some outstanding issues, but we just wanted to share with you that if you were, as the UPC moves forward and addresses, reserve policies or CIP execution or any other factor, we can certainly work with you. We'll establish our base case, and then we can look at the different scenarios that you may wish to look at here. Okay. And that really was just kind of the intent of what we wanted. Kind of wanted to share with you today. I would estimate we're probably 90 to 95% of the way done with the base case financial model. Recognizing that we are in March, we're trying to set rates in effective 1/1/2024. I'm guessing we're going to have some modifications to the numbers and so forth. One of the things too I wanted to chat with you briefly about is, Nish, could you go to the expense tab? Please don't go asleep on the detail, but the detail is very necessary for us. Over in column G, you'll see the various accounts and titles. Obviously, the city is a significant size system. But what we do is we break down the type of expenses into certain categories. Is it benefit? Is it salaries and wages? Is it health insurance? Okay. Is it repair and maintenance? Is it other? That we can't necessarily tie it to a specific category. And I just wanted to touch base on this real briefly. And then Nish, if you could go to the EF tab, please, which is our escalation factors, just in case you're kind of wondering, how do we get from point A today to point Z at the end of 10 years? You'll see that we have a series of escalation factors that we, have discussed with the city. Salary and wages, chemicals, fuel, chemicals particularly always is greater, seems to be greater than that's usually our highest escalator as we work through this. Okay. So I just wanted to share these with you. We do have something we're checking out in line 26 that Peter and James asked us about, and we're still we haven't finalized that, but weighted operating cost would be kind of a weighting of the above factors that we would apply to certain cost categories. And we have some bouncing around going around in, column H, I, J, and K, for instance, where 6.2 to 0.69. So we're looking into that. That's a normal part of the process for us as we ultimately do our quality control on the model and discuss with the client in UPC. So another tab, Nish, which might be just helpful but real quick, would be the debt tab, where we have the existing amortization schedules for the water debt that the city currently has. The model will also calculate additions to those debt service costs for new debt. And that's another aspect of the model. We might,
Can I take a
Go
look
ahead.
at some? Would it be helpful for us to go to the first tab and say that the capital execution is 20%, and it may display what you're referring to as capital as driving, what the mayor is referring to as capital as driving rate. Because
Okay.
currently, the capital component is, I'm just looking in the summary that you provided me with, 46 million, 35 million, 37. If we went back to the place where you were doing 5 million of capital, which was just a couple of years ago, if you
Okay.
could hear the execution rate of like 20%.
Sure, we can plug that in here for you and then recalibrate the model.
I'm just hoping this will help answer the mayor's question of why do the rates have to go up so much?
I also know that.
See, if you caught that on line 11, Nish has already recalibrated the projects or recalibrated the rate increase, assuming only a 20% execution of CIP. And it says that you would not need an increase in 24 through 27. And then you'd have a 4.3% bump in 28. Okay. So it would kind of pivot around there as other factors affected the out years of the forecast. Okay. So
Yeah, a little kind of, because the capital is just so giant. It's,
yes,
when we 80% of 45 million, you're talking 35 million. The revenue isn't 35 million in a year, you know?
yeah, and as we talked about that the other day, Peter, you know, with James, you know, I mean, historically, there hasn't been the capital needs of the system for whatever reason were much smaller, and so forth. Couple things here that I want to just add in here too, because you know we've had some involvement in reviewing Prine and Newhoff's work on the affordability plan that the city's looking to put in, and there may be some costs of that program that are borne by all ratepayers under the current approach. The model does not reflect that at this point. Okay. As the affordability program moves along, assuming it does, and more definition is given to the program in the impacts, assuming the city continues on its approach to charge the costs, any associated costs of the program to the other customers, that would be reflected here. Now I'll say that with a caveat, because initially, you know, everybody says, well, gee, the cost of the program, why should I, as a customer, if I'm paying my bill, be charged for it? But there are certain reductions of other costs, such as credit and collection and bad debts, for instance, that the implementation of an affordability program might provide benefits which may or may not absorb all of the program costs. And we have been working with Prine and Newhoff and actually provided them a business case evaluation tool that we've used with other clients that they have populated and we're still working through. But that tool is meant to capture the reductions in costs associated with implementing an affordability program. Okay. So that's why you see on the title here, it says preliminary. And that's because we're continuing to work through some of those issues as we're here in March. I will say, our team is also taking the next step in working with this numbers to establish our cost allocation model, which will take these, if you consider all of these cost items and, say, okay, in the current plan, whatever that current plan is, that creates a total column of your revenue requirements. And then we will use industry standards, much like Bart Foster used, to develop unitized rates for residential customers, commercial customers, et cetera, across the city system. Meaning that, you've moved to unitized or equal rates now for township residential customers pay the same as the city residential customers do. So that's a piece of our work that's underway. Typically, we won't probably share that with you until we finalize, the results of the revenue requirement analysis or what the FAMS is showing us. So, Niche is going to ruin your day because he's going to make everything go away that we talked about for scenarios, pending further discussion, right? And take the model kind of back to where it was, with the ties to the existing, reserve policy documents from staff, city staff, okay? And Niche, you got me to red. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, you saw the red show up in the senior lead and debt service coverage for a minute. That's one of the things obviously we look at. Red is not good. That puts the city in default on their covenants, and we don't want that ever to happen. So with that, I've talked a lot. I'll stop. Does UPC, anybody there have any further questions for us, kind of at least where we're at right now?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, we'll drop off. Thanks. Peter, we certainly appreciate your involvement the other day, and we look forward to any further comments you have. We provided Peter a series of what we call workbook schedules, which depict the information in summary format, detailed but summary format. So I know he probably hasn't had a whole lot of time to look at that. We'll continue to work through that. We'll get busy on developing kind of a tech memo, for lack of a better term, on your issue around, the equity benefit fee, and provide our thoughts to you. Just to, if I could confirm, the April meeting is when?
13th.
13th, super. My wife tells me I'm taking her someplace warm for a couple weeks. So while I'll still be working, I won't be necessarily here in Michigan. So anyways, if there's no further questions for us, we appreciate your time. If you have any follow-up questions, that come up as you kind of ponder what we presented, I mean, you can shoot them directly to me if you want, or shoot them to James, whatever works best in the process, or consolidate them through Peter as he looks at the workbook schedules that we've provided. So with that, thank you all for your time. Have a nice day. Enjoy our 42, 43 degree weather before the next snowstorm hits.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
It's him.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the water rate affordability follow-up and schedule.
We'd ask if you push that date.
Okay.
When does that have to be to the thing?
So I believe it's, late April. But it does have to go to the state. And so just sort of updates on what we're working on.
extent that live still exists, when we stand across that would also come into play. And again, we're still recommending the program have full administration by Community Action Agency of South Central Michigan, and essentially one-stop shop. We talked a lot about helping a bigger group a little bit versus helping a smaller group all the way. Looking at the limited funding that we would get from 1% of water rates, we could help. We would estimate approximately 800 families, a partial amount every month or every quarter on the water bill. If we really focus on helping families with the total water bill, that would really reduce the number of participants. Something probably like 300 or less would be able to participate with that. So that's kind of a broad approach of where we're headed. If any of that is out of line, let us know. And that's kind of where we're headed at the moment.
And original item C, capital improvement program.
I just want to announce that, we've got projects actively going on and happening. Some rather big ones, in fact. We've got Ransom Street. That is a water project and a sewer project. That's a over $12 million project that's awarded. That's going to start here shortly this year. I believe pipes here for Lake Street, so that's going to be starting. That's a Kalamazoo Township project. We've got pipe here, and we're starting work on 33rd Street. So we had the ComSoc supervisor, Scott Hess, give me an email the other day of, hey, what's going on out here? We're doing the work, the pipes are going to show up. So there is a lot of work happening on the capital aspect of it. We did get approval by Eagle for our KARES 8700 product for optimized corrosion control. So that now starts the clock on engineering design of all the stations for station improvements. That's something that's going to be happening. We've got probably about $7 million of project encumbrances that we're hoping to go on and send that wave out to get that work completed. But there'll be a second wave behind that that's in the engineering process right now. Though some of you may be aware, we just experienced potentially one of the worst ice storms that this area has experienced since 1985. The utility went through that very well, although there was a lot of heavy lifting and staff attention and that. That was miraculous work by a whole lot of staff to get generators out and get systems and things working. When the ice storm hit that night, we lost absolute total communication of the water system, and we had some very large plants completely offline. Our crews went out at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, drove. Some of them had to actually physically crawl over trees to get into 6th Street Water Tower in Oshkosh. Manually look at what the gauge said, call back, have somebody go to the nearest pump station and manually engage and turn on pumps to make that happen. So that is a very precarious space to be in for a large public water utility with 196,000 people connected to it. So there was a lot of work going on. We exhausted all of our generators. We actually had some generators brought in from Detroit to help us keep everything up and going. So what do we learn from this? System reliability is a #1 concern for us. We've got to make sure that that remains to be the #1 concern. We've got a lot of system generator projects where we're planning to put generators where there's not one currently. We're going to accelerate those projects. We're going to move them up our project already. So just want to let everybody know that got a lot of great work, and some of the work that was perhaps a few years out, we're pulling forward. So it's my goal to, Peter, to prove you wrong on that capital execution rate that you think I can do at 20%. So we're gonna.
No, I just wanted to show the.
I got a question, James.
Yes, sir.
So on the water sewer, like in Ransom Street, you're
Yeah.
doing streetscape and new lighting. Is that, what budget does that come out of?
No, that's a great question. So we're doing a lot of projects that we're bringing, we call multidisciplinary transportation core projects, where we're bringing work underwater, work on wastewater, work on streets. And really, when we bring all those funds together, we're kind of taking the asset management plan approach to doing projects. We also partner with Road Commission in Kalamazoo County, City of Portage, and any one of the townships that want to partner on a project where there's a road project that needs to happen, and we also need to do the water main replacement. So
So they're different buckets.
they're different buckets, but they kind of, they come together. And we've, depending on what the funding source is an MDOT LAP project. They have specific requirements of participating, non-participating funds, and we have to follow those established rules. If it's an Eagle funded project, like the Ransom Street is funded primarily by wastewater Eagle, so it's clean water. They call it the AJE fund that adjusts, wastewater can pay for stuff that's under the influence of the trench, where that wastewater trench is, what the basic roadway configuration is look like. Wastewater cannot pay for streetscape amenity items, grasses and tree plantings, but it can pay for, what it takes out. So we found that, whether it's the city of Portage, the townships, city of Kalamazoo, we all benefit if we can do the projects together, where we're pulling road funding together with water funding together with wastewater funding. Because at that point, everyone's balancing what they're paying.
So when you said 12 million for that project, is it more than that because other people are helping fund this? Or is it
So
a number?
the project construction costs are approximately $12.6 million. There's an additional $800,000 in project construction engineering that's on top of that. Those are all just split out. Wastewater is carrying about $6 million of that $12 million project load. Water is carrying approximately, I think, something near $3 million. I don't have
So
exact.
that answers my question.
Yeah.
3 and 6.
Yeah,
But that's only part of the 12.
correct.
Thank you. On the generators, I would say order them now.
Yeah.
We're over a year waiting for generators for those fire stations.
Wow.
That back now.
Wow.
It's difficult. Item B and F, it looks like there's duplication. So, and I understand the city appointed Steve Incendi, and welcome.
Well, actually,
He's an alternate,
He's
right?
the alternate.
so I moved from alternate to a member in the city.
Probation.
Right. Steve Essenzi, our management services director, is already an alternate, so he's city alternate.
Alternate number 1, and then the new city alternate is Melissa Fuller, who's the deputy director of management services. So city of Kalamazoo now has all of the positions appointed.
Thank you. Okay. Item E, the utility financial policy. Yeah, you alluded to some of that when we talked about the rates.
Yeah. So, the city utility financial policy were many of the factors they were changing within that rate model. And so I thought it would be a good, time to, walk through these so everybody has a understanding of what the city utility financial policies are. And I'm gonna put some people on the spot here from the city, just because I had a chance to walk through this document, and I asked that this be provided to all as part of your packet. And it says water and wastewater utility financial policy, and this is on the UPC website and available. And so my thought, looking at the clock, is that I think we want to be done in 15 minutes, correct? So what I would like to ask people to do is, I read through this, and it's actually a little thicker, like twice as thick, but the second component looks like it was kind of a first approach to it and looked at numbers from many years ago. But I would ask that people read this first component and we walk through this at our next meeting. But I wanted to touch upon a couple of things. And that was my thought, that to put the city on the spot. I'm just asking, and it could be research, within that utility financial policy, there is a resolution. And it looks like that. And what I did is I asked one of our visitors to make a copy of it. And so each of you should have gotten this information, and I just put a marker on there. And I think this is what the adopted city utility financial policy is. And it talks about debt service coverage, reserves, and things of that nature. And my thought would be, if all would be willing to just read the first component of this and just look at this, and at next meeting we could discuss it. Because I don't know that we have sufficient time today. But I also wanted to touch upon something else, which is part of the utility financial policy. And since you have the paperwork, I'd like to walk through it. Do you have a question or a comment, or?
Is the timing of this for working on the rates, that still works to do this in April?
Yes, I think it's just important for us to understand what they are.
Okay.
As far as I know, there isn't an intent at the current time to change the city's utility financial policy. But per the contract, we have input into the city utility financial policy or changes in such, and we should understand it. It drives the rate. So it's more of an educational thing. I did want to touch upon the very first policy that is identified within the city utility financial policy, which is the debt service coverage target, which is 1.4 times coverage. And since we have some of the paperwork, I'll do it as briefly as I can. I thought we could touch upon this, and at the next meeting, we could perhaps just walk through those city utility financial policies so we understand them and the implications on the rate. So I would ask that if you have a handout that shows the financial statements for the city, you took the city's financial statements, and then there is a document that is the coverage. And they're on the table here. And I wanted to just perhaps help those participants here and visitors to understand many of the townships operate with governmental funds, meaning they have a general fund and maybe a water fund and a sewer fund, but those water and sewer funds are on the modified accrual basis of accounting. The city is on the full accrual basis of accounting for their water and sewer operations. So they are reporting their fixed assets, their long-term liabilities, and this is pulled out of the audit. Within this document, there is a statement of net position. And if you turn in 3 pages, you should see a statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. So there is the handout. It's multiple page. And I believe the 4th page in, it says page 56. Do you see statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position? What I wanted to do is just highlight the concept that this statement, to some extent, drives the city's coverage, bond coverage calculation. And I wanted to point out, if you are a township with a water fund or a sewer fund, they are using special revenue funds to account for them. So this would look different. So what's being used to drive the calculation are the operating revenues and the operations and maintenance Risk management, that's excluded, but not depreciation. So I just wanted to point out that these financial statements drive the coverage to some extent. So if you take a look at page 192, which is a separate handout, here is the city calculating what their coverage is. And so for 2021, the revenues at the top of the page come directly off the financial statements. That is the operating revenues, the interest revenue, and intergovernmental revenues. And at the bottom, it discusses what gets excluded from this calculation. Before I go further into just the concept, I want to keep it as brief as I can. Many of the townships may have debt outstanding, and you don't have any coverage requirements. You may have general obligation bonds outstanding that you financed a new park, a hall, a fire truck, or whatever it is. And this may be a new concept to you, but when you issue revenue bonds, which the city does to finance the water and sewer system, they're required to have revenues less specific expenses sufficient to pay the debt service on those bonds, 1.2 times. But realize you likely have never had any coverage requirements on your bonds. You say, I'm going to pledge my full faith and credit for the repayment of this. You will tax until you can tax no more to repay a general obligation bond. Does that make sense or understandable? Well, what the city is issuing is revenue bonds. And they're saying we will repay you if we collect water revenue. If we don't collect water revenue, we're not paying. And therefore, because there's only a limited revenue source and you haven't pledged your property taxes or other revenues, your full faith and credit, the people buying those bonds want to have some assurance they're going to get paid, right? And therefore, we have the concept of bond coverage. And at the bottom of page 192, it walks through what is included and what is excluded. I would just say the revenues are generally included in this calculation unless they're grants or capital. And the expenses are generally just your operating expenses. And the difference between those revenues and expenses need to cover the cost of principal and interest on the bonds. And expenses exclude the purchase of capital assets, and they exclude depreciation on those capital assets. And it's specifically defined at the bottom of the page, what's going in and what's being added to those costs. And so when we were looking at those graphs, we saw a coverage of the target is currently 1.4. The requirement is 1.2. So the city has covenants that say we will set a budget to hit 1.2. The city has a policy that says our target is 1.4 because when we fluctuate from budget, we don't want to take the risk of not meeting the covenants that we have borrowed under. And so I wanted to just try to, and hopefully it's a little helpful, just try to understand, we may look at the city's financial statements and they could have net income in a specific year or an increase in your net position and not meet your bond covenants. So covenants are not necessarily, they aren't the bottom line for the water fund. It can make money and you not meet your bond covenants. You can lose money theoretically and meet your bond covenants. And so when we're looking at this rate calculation, we're really using something other than what is the bottom line for the city. We're using, do we meet that covenant under 1.2 times debt service requirements, and how do we calculate it? So hopefully, if you looked at page 192 and you just read the notes, it'll help a little bit. I work in the accounting area every working day. And I don't expect that you do, but I wanted you to have a general understanding of when we start talking about this coverage, what does it mean? It's basically saying, how much money are you bringing in? Cash? Can you pay us 1.2 times? And that is the first policy that was within that document with the highlighted green. But I just think if if you would be willing, and if we don't want to do it, that's okay, but I thought if we just read the first portion of this policy, it's maybe 15 pages long, and it has some important insight. There's interesting things that say, why do we need to have this coverage? Why does the city need to do this? And I'm just assuming, because this was approved many years ago, that this was kind of, here's the case for us for having these policies, which we should understand because we're going to be able to have input on them. And then this is what was approved. And so I think this is the policy, but I would maybe ask the next time we come to you and say, I think this is the utility financial policy. This is why they support that policy, or did at that point in time. But that we would have input on this, should we want to going forward. And if we don't want to do it, not do it, but more of an educational thing.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. We had,
Do you want to read it and go over it next time?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Can I
We'll move that
the
agenda.
question though, that, that's our financial policy. We have motions, we have bond counsel. There's a lot of factors that layer in to decisions all the time. From a city standpoint, if there's going to be a discussion about our policy, it'd be helpful to know what we want to discuss so that we can have the appropriate staff available to discuss those.
My thought is with these policies right here, that if we all came back and said, I read through them and they make sense. I'm not saying to change them whatsoever. I'm just trying to educate, I hope, so that when we have a rate calculation and it says the reserve is 90 days, we understand why, because that's the city's policy. And I don't suspect we would make changes or try to make changes. I wouldn't at this time, but more of a, we get these terms in these rate calculations, and I think to myself, most people don't even know what they're doing or why that number is what it is, and this says why it is.
So we will
Here,
have that discussion in April, and then. if
Should
it-
you want to, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to do that, and then if it ever
And-
got to
and
the point
someone
of
could
wanting more.
come. But someone could come for sure, and I'm just trying to do like an educational contract says we have insight into it. Nobody knows what it is. You do, but some people do. So.
Thank you. The next item then is the professional services invoice approvals.
So I'm happy to make a motion to approve the payment of. I've got a question, I guess, in the motion here. One of them says Ross Township meeting review.
So, there was on new business, we were gonna talk about that. I read the minutes of James's meeting at Ross Township.
That is intended for this.
Yeah, it has to do with the extension of water potentially into Ross Township and agreements with Ross Township. So,
The approval and payment of 2 invoices from Pine Newhoff. Invoice number is 73047 72568. Support.
Motion by David, support by Jim, to approve the 2 Prine and Newhoff invoices as described. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
abstain.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0 and 1 abstention.
Move approval of the Bredeville Hafner LLC invoice number 5649, approval payment.
Support.
Motion by David, support by Jim. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion carries 6-0 and 1 abstention.
No, I was not.
Update on the financial data review.
We do that quarterly, so
Quarterly,
nothing.
yeah. Ross Township presentation recap.
Yeah, in regards to update on it, there is an unofficial transcript.
Yeah, so, did I, sewers are
Libby, so, and I can make it available to all UPC members, just read through it. That's my understanding, you know, there's, you know, talk of water expansion potentially in Ross Township, you know, due to PFAS. We've studied that, in our water reliability, models and reports that we sent to the state, so we were, you know, dusting that off and moving that way. I think there was, you know, potentially a number of citizens in Ross that perhaps needed some more information. That goes up to the board level, and just in conversations with Ross's supervisor, offered the ability to go to the board and talk about it. That occurred on January 17th. I think it was a very positive experience for myself and I think the board members. Just there's a lot of background and history with Ross. In fact, we own property in Ross for a future station for the system, and so there's, you know, Mr. Reed can probably appreciate this. Depending on how far you want to dig in and look, there's a lot of information there. But you know, currently we do not serve Ross Township, so there's if that ever were to be developed, you know, there's a lot of established things in play already. One of those is that Go Lake Sewer and Water Authority is the retail service provider for that district. Our water contract, a 4-year contract, has an exhibit in the back that shows the future service area for Go Lake Sewer and Water Authority. And so there's a whole lot of options, you know, none of them are on the table. I think my takeaway from that meeting was that if there was going to be public planning and exercises and things of that nature that included Ross, then we should include Ross in those discussions. And I think certainly that's a fair request, and I'd be happy to do so. That being said, we study things all the time. We study Alamo. We study, you know, areas. We just sort of the pavilion or signatory to our contract, but we're not necessarily, you know, in the pavilion every day. So that stuff does happen. It's pretty routine stuff. So I'll leave it with that and make the unofficial minutes available to everybody. Our next packet, if you will.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on that? Committee member, alternate attendee, guest comments. I'll start with anyone online, any comments?
Yes. Mark?
I just like to. Did a lot of heavy lifting today, and appreciate that guidance. And for the city, Jim, I appreciated your Ross Township discussion because it opened up a lot of things that I see the city is doing and now backstage, looking at alternative sources. Some mentioned even of Lake Michigan as a source. And I know it's probably not much more than what I call back of envelope kind of procedures, but when you compare Kalamazoo area with Flint, I think you're probably more accessible to Great Lake than Flint is. So those are certainly in the mix of things, so appreciate that. Very good report. Thank you.
For Jim, last Tuesday we had the Public Water Supply Administrator with Eagle presentation. You were probably on it, and I listened to them all on that. I saw the amount of funds that the feds and the rest of it, how much that was, and I was amazed at how much they were put in the revolving fund, water revolving fund, and some of the grant. Are you looking at any applications at all on the grant?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are every year we have applications in for drinking water revolving loan fund, clean water revolving loan fund.
We had a scorecard.
Yeah, it depends where your range, you got your grants and fund ball range. Just a reminder that we were awarded over $15 million for this year for projects in Kalamazoo for lead service line replacement. So, you know, we make a big deal when we get grants and things of that nature. Although it's easy to forget, you know, we talk about $30 to $45 million capital improvement fund. Those numbers can be pretty big, but bringing $15 million home for our local community is still a wonderful thing. And so we're continuing that right away.
I had a tour, after a tour your facility last week. I know you had some new projects. I was a lot of those like grants.
Yeah, some are, you know, there is a lot of grant involvement in the work we do. It probably hasn't come a year that there's not some amount of grant somewhere, and we're constantly going out for more. Now, is the whole thing grant? No. You know, it's still, you know, broadly carried percentage, you know, primarily by grants. But, you know, every little bit helps. And $15 million for lead services certainly helps. So, you know, there's a lot of work that we're doing to continue to apply for those grant resources.
Real quick, last, they talked about the electrical replacement, that they were behind a little bit. Is the city, you're ahead of?
We're ahead, yeah, we're ahead. We're going to continue to be ahead. We're going to finish out ahead of many other communities.
Thank you.
Jim?
Just want to say a great discussion. I appreciate seeing all the work that goes on behind the scene by the city or the regional commission, the townships, or whoever it may be, take it, see them on these agendas. By looking at the agenda and the discussion, I know the policy says we shall meet quarterly, but I don't know if they'll get there this year. I was kind of thinking we would, but I'm kind of, I don't know. Seems like every agenda we got something for the next month.
Okay,
Thank you.
board members, anything?
One thing that I will probably bring to the UPC next month is sort of housekeeping form of an easement, so that all of the townships are using the same easement throughout the system, so that it's consistent, and I know that right now it's not. So I will go ahead and send forward. I've got one that Texas had, I think that was, the city was involved in.
Yeah, and then has Anna sent you the Oshimo one?
No, I sent her that one.
Okay.
I haven't seen it back. So
Okay.
we'll provide something for the next meeting. It'll probably be then a motion to have a committee or have a lawyer come up with something. There's some things I don't like about the one that we got.
So that would be a system-wide easement?
It would be, yeah, so
Not
it
just
would be
the
system-wide. It would-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for the city, for the townships.
It probably has to name the township or
Yeah.
city municipal boundary that it's in.
Yeah.
So that's probably something that will need that attorney, and there's, you know, 11 of them.
And there may be a difference in the city, because the city is to the city, but because the city's acting as an agent of the townships.
Right.
That we've had it as.
No, that's
meeting code.
great.
So, anyway, just to get.
Jim? John?
Peter? James, I just wanted to share with you, there's a Department of Public Works component to the packet that was sent out, and it's like 100 pages of data. And I thought it was really informative, like the first 3 pages were by your director of water.
Yeah.
And it, you know, talked about the number of staff, and what have we done, and what's been prepared, and all that stuff. So I would appreciate it when this, I guess, I made it anyway. I just thought it was a good piece of information. I have one question for you when we're done, it's just obscure, but thank you for that information, that's to your director. It was interesting to go through there, to know more than there's a water system, what's going on.
Yeah, so that's our annual water report. And that's got kind of everything that happened in the previous year, and then summarized with our asset management plan report update that we submit to Eagle.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of packaged all together as one. The director, as referenced, is likely myself, but it's not necessarily named in there. And, you know, again, happy to review it with you, Peter, but the goal is to provide UPC some high-level understanding of, you know, things that are happening throughout the department over the last year.
And it did, so thank you.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Okay. Just 2 things, in terms of that stand-back rate study, I just thought of something, if we do the equity benefit fee, what would that do to the rates? If there's.
Sure.
So that'll be a factor. And then the other second thing is, I think, you know, I'm stepping down as supervisor May 1st. I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna be, looks like I'm gonna be part-time working in parks here. And then I'm still gonna be, on UPC. That's not changing. Unless until the region. So we've exhausted the agenda and we are adjourned. Thank you.